The bell above the chapel door rang at 3:41 in the morning, which was a problem because the rope to that bell had been cut and removed in 1987, and the bell itself, according to the inventory I had been given on my first day, was missing its clapper. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm asking because I want to know how many of you are awake at the kind of hour when you start questioning whether sounds are real. I am 36 years old. I worked for 11 months as the resident caretaker at a private cemetery called Hollybrook Burial Ground in a town in northeastern Vermont that I am not going to name, on the recommendation of a man who was, until July, my employer, and who I now understand was protecting me when he gave that recommendation. And even if his protection turned out not to be enough, I took the job because I had run out of other options. I had been a high school history teacher in Massachusetts for 9 years. I had lost my job in March of last year for reasons that are public record and that I am not going to go into here, except to say that the reasons did not involve children or money or anything criminal, and that the loss of the job had been, in my estimation, unfair, and that I had spent 6 months trying to find a new teaching position and had not been able to. I was $43,000 in debt, mostly student loans. My wife and I had separated in May. The Hollybrook position paid $48,000 a year, included on-site housing in a small caretaker's cottage, included health insurance, and required only that I maintain the grounds and supervise the rare burial and live on the property. The previous caretaker, a man named Thomas Aldred, had held the position for 23 years before retiring at 68. The cemetery's board of trustees, which consisted of 3 elderly women who lived in town and who had inherited their positions from their parents, had hired me over the phone after a 15-minute interview. They had not asked for references. They had not asked about the gap on my resume. They had asked whether I was comfortable being alone for long stretches and whether I had any health conditions that would make it difficult to live in a place without immediate medical access. I had told them no to the second and yes to the first. They had hired me. The man who recommended me, the only personal connection I had used in the application, was Thomas Aldred himself. I had met him through a college friend whose family was from the town. He had heard I needed work. He had called me. He had told me about the position. He had also, on the phone, told me 3 things that I now realize were warnings disguised as information. The first thing he told me was that the job had a binder. He said the binder was in the kitchen drawer of the cottage, 3rd drawer, down on the left, and that I should read it cover to cover before my first night, and that I should not skip any of it. He said the binder had been added to by every caretaker since 1936, and that the items in it were not optional. He said this in the tone of a man giving me the entry code to a building, calm and procedural, as if he were just listing things I should know. The second thing he told me was that the cemetery had 13 sections, marked with iron stakes painted white, and that the boundaries of the sections mattered. He said I should never move the stakes. He said if a stake went missing, I should call him before doing anything else, even if it took him days to call back. He said the stakes had been in their current positions since 1936, and that moving them, even by a few inches, would change things he could not explain over the phone. The third thing he told me was that the bell on the chapel had been disabled in 1987, and that the chapel itself was kept locked at all times. He said the key to the chapel was on a separate ring from the other keys, and that the separate ring was hidden behind a loose brick in the cottage fireplace, and that I should not retrieve the key unless one of the conditions in the binder required it, He said this in a slightly different tone than the first two things, and I noticed it at the time, but I did not press him. I drove up to the cemetery on a Sunday afternoon in late August. The drive from Boston took 5 hours. The town was small, maybe 400 people, with one general store and one diner and one Episcopal church that I would never see anyone enter. The cemetery was 3 miles outside the town, on a dirt road that branched off the state route and ran through dense maple forest for a mile before opening up into a clearing of about 12 acres. The clearing held the cemetery itself, a low fieldstone wall around the perimeter, the chapel at the eastern edge, and the caretaker's cottage at the western edge. It is separated from the chapel by the entire length of the burial ground. Thomas met me at the cottage at 3 p.m. He was a tall, thin man with white hair and a gray beard, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who has lived alone for a long time and has stopped wasting motion. He showed me through the cottage, which had 2 rooms and a small kitchen, and a bathroom with a propane water heater. He showed me the keys, which hung on a board next to the door, 12 keys total, each labeled with a small paper tag in handwriting I assumed was his. He showed me the radio in the kitchen, which was an old shortwave model with a dial that had been marked with white paint at a specific frequency, and he told me to leave the dial where it was. He showed me the binder, which was 3 inches thick, and in a black 3-ring binder with no label on the spine. He did not show me the chapel key. He told me where it was, behind the loose brick in the fireplace. And he told me again not to retrieve it unless the binder required it. He stayed for about an hour. He answered the practical questions I asked. He did not volunteer information beyond what I asked for. When I walked him to his truck at 4 p.m., he stopped with his hand on the door and he looked at me for a long moment, and he said, "I want you to know that the job is not what the trustees told you it is. The job is what is in the binder. The trustees have not read the binder. The trustees do not know what the binder says. The trustees believe the cemetery is a normal cemetery, and that the caretaker's job is grounds maintenance and burial supervision. The previous caretaker, the one before me, the one who hired me in 1972, told me the same thing on his last day, and I am telling you now. Read the binder, follow what it says, do not improvise." The reason I lasted 23 years is that I did not improvise. The 2 caretakers before me each lasted less than a year. One of them died. One of them disappeared. I do not want either of those things to happen to you. Read the binder. He got in his truck. He drove away. I watched the truck until it was out of sight on the dirt road. Then I went into the cottage. I went to the kitchen. I opened the 3rd drawer on the left. I took out the binder. I want to give you the items the way I learned them, not the way they appeared in the binder. Because the binder was organized by category, and the categories did not make sense until I had violated some of the items. The binder had 9 categories. The categories were labeled in handwriting as boundaries, burials, bell, chapel, cottage, radio, visitors, weather, and other. Each category had between 4 and 23 items. Total item count, by my eventual count, after I had read the binder 3 times in my first week, was 147. I'm going to give you 4 items now. These are the items that mattered to what happened on the night of August 14th of this year, when the bell on the chapel rang at 3:41 in the morning, despite having no rope and no clapper. The first item, from the bell category, said, "The bell on the chapel was disabled in 1987 by the caretaker at that time, who removed the rope and the clapper and stored both in a wooden box in the chapel basement. The disabling did not work, yet the bell continued to ring on certain nights, despite the absence of the mechanical components required for it to do so. The disabling has been left in place because removing the components made the ringing less frequent than it had been previously, when the bell rang several times per week. Since 1987, the bell has rung approximately 3 to 5 times per year. When the bell rings, do not go outside. Do not approach the chapel. Do not look at the chapel from the cottage windows. Stay in the cottage. The ringing will continue for between 4 and 90 minutes. When the ringing stops, do not investigate. Wait until sunrise to leave the cottage. Do not record the ringing. Do not write down the date and time of the ringing. The dates and times of the ringings are not patterns we are meant to track. The second item, from the boundaries category, said, the cemetery has 13 sections marked by iron stakes, painted white, and set at the corners of each section. The stakes were placed in 1936 by a surveyor named Jacob Holm, who was hired by the trustees of that time after a series of incidents that the trustees do not have records of. The stakes must remain in their current positions. If a stake is moved, the section it bounds becomes unstable. The graves within an unstable section may produce visitors. The visitors are not the people buried in the graves. The visitors will appear to be the people buried in the graves, based on the names on the headstones, but they will not be those people. Do not engage with visitors. Do not acknowledge them. Do not speak to them. If you see a visitor, return to the cottage and do not look out the windows for the rest of the night. The visitors cannot enter the cottage if the doors and windows are closed and locked. The third item from the chapel category said, the chapel is kept locked at all times. The chapel contains items from the previous configuration of the cemetery before 1936, including the original record book that lists the burials from 1847 to 1935. The original record book contains names that do not match the names on the headstones. The discrepancy is intentional. The 1936 reorganization changed the names on the headstones to break the connection between the buried persons and the visitors who were appearing at that time. The original record book must remain in the chapel. It must not be removed. It must not be photographed. Yet it must not be read by anyone other than the caretaker, and the caretaker must read it only when a specific condition has been met. The condition is described in Other, Item 14. The fourth item from the Other category, Item 14, said, the original record book in the chapel must be consulted only when a visitor appears whose face you recognize. If you see a visitor and you do not know whose grave they have come from, but you recognize the face from your own life, take the chapel key from behind the loose brick in the fireplace, walk to the chapel, unlock the door, retrieve the original record book, and look up the name that the headstone in the relevant section has been changed from. The name in the original record book will tell you who the visitor actually is. Knowing this will not help you. The reason for consulting the book is documentation. The caretaker must record the encounter in the binder, in this category, with the date and the recognized face and the original name. Do not skip this step. The records are how we have learned what we know. After recording the encounter, return the key to the brick. Do not return to the chapel for any other reason that night. I read those 4 items in my first week. I read them in the order they appeared in the binder, which was not the order I have given them to you because the binder was organized by category. I did not understand, in my first week, why the items existed. I had never seen the bell ring. I had never seen a visitor. I had never had reason to enter the chapel. I read the items the way you read the policies in an employee handbook on your first day at a job. Which is to say, I read them carefully, but without believing them, with the assumption that the items reflected the institutional history of the cemetery and the eccentricities of past caretakers, and that nothing in the binder would actually require action from me. For the first 10 months, I was right about that. The job was, by every external measure, easy. I mowed the grass once a week from May to October. I trimmed around the headstones. I cleared fallen branches. I supervised 3 burials in my first year, all of them elderly residents of the town who had family plots in sections 4, 7, and 11. The burials were attended by small groups of family and conducted by a funeral director from a town 20 miles away. I shook hands with the family members. I made sure the grave was properly closed. And I logged the burial in the standard log book the trustees kept, which was a different book from the binder and which I will not be discussing further. I was paid every 2 weeks by direct deposit. I received my health insurance card in the mail. I had quiet evenings in the cottage, where I read books and called my brother in California once a week, and slowly worked on rebuilding my financial situation. I started to feel, for the first time in over a year, that I was going to be okay. The bell rang on August 14th of this year, at 3:41 in the morning. I want to tell you that I followed the rule. I want to tell you that I stayed in the cottage and waited for sunrise, and did not investigate. I cannot tell you that. I am going to tell you what I actually did. Because what I actually did is the reason I am no longer the caretaker at Hollybrook, and the reason a man named David Carrick, who was the assistant funeral director from the town 20 miles away, and who I had worked with on all 3 of my supervised burials, is now in a hospital in Burlington, with injuries I am not allowed to discuss because of an active investigation. And the reason I am recording this from a motel room in upstate New York, with the chain on the door and the curtains closed. The bell rang at 3:41. I had been asleep. The sound woke me. I sat up in bed. The first ring had a slight echo, the way an iron bell does when it is struck in cold air, and there was a delay of maybe 4 seconds before the second ring. The second ring was louder. The third ring came 2 seconds after the second. Yet the fourth ring came 1 second after the third. By the fifth ring, the bell was ringing continuously, the way a bell rings during a fire, with no interval between strikes. And I sat up in bed and I felt, for the first time in 11 months, the kind of fear that comes from understanding that a thing you had been told about as a story is, in fact, real. I got out of bed. I walked to the kitchen. I did not look out the windows. I did not turn on the lights. I went to the binder. I opened it to the bell category. I read item 1 again, the item I had read maybe 4 times in 11 months and had stopped thinking about. The item said, as I have already told you, that I should not go outside, should not approach the chapel, should not look at the chapel from the cottage windows, and should stay in the cottage until sunrise. As I stood in the kitchen and I read the item 3 times. The bell continued to ring outside. The sound was loud enough that I could feel it in the floor of the cottage, a small vibration in the boards. The bell rang for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 4 minutes by my watch, and then it stopped. The silence after the ringing was complete. There were no insects, no birds, no wind. The silence was the silence of a room that had been waiting for me to listen. I sat down at the kitchen table. I held the binder. I tried to think. I had a problem. The item said the bell would ring for between 4 and 90 minutes. The bell had rung for 4 minutes. the lower end of the range. I had no way of knowing whether the ringing was actually over or whether it was a pause before more ringing. The item said to stay in the cottage until sunrise. Sunrise was at 5:43 a.m. by my phone's weather app. I had 2 hours and 2 minutes to wait. I sat at the table. I did not turn on the lights. I waited. At 3:53 a.m., 12 minutes after the ringing had stopped, I heard footsteps outside the cottage. The footsteps were on the gravel path that ran from the cottage door to the main path through the cemetery. The footsteps were unhurried. They sounded like the footsteps of a person walking at a normal pace, the way you walk when you are not in a hurry and not afraid. They walked from the direction of the chapel, across the gravel, and stopped at the cottage door. Then there was a knock. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, the way a person knocks who is delivering a package or a piece of mail. I did not move, and I did not breathe. I did not look at the door. The voice that came through the door said my name. The voice said, "Marcus, it's David. Open up. There's been an accident." David Carrick was the assistant funeral director I knew. The voice was his voice. I had worked with him on 3 burials. I had spoken with him on the phone 4 times in the past month, scheduling the next burial that was supposed to take place in mid-September. The voice was unmistakable. The cadence was his cadence. The slightly Vermont-inflected vowels. The way he pronounced my name with a small emphasis on the second syllable that I had always found slightly off-putting. I sat at the table. I held the binder. I read item 4 from the other category. The item said that if I saw a visitor whose face I recognized, then I was to take the chapel key and consult the original record book. The item did not say what to do if a visitor knocked on my door using the voice of someone I knew. The item did not address the auditory question at all. The item assumed that recognition would be visual. The knocking came again, 3 knocks. Then the voice said, "Marcus, come on, I can hear you in there. It's freezing out here. Just open the door." I sat at the table. I tried to think. The voice was David's voice, but David lived 20 miles away, in town. David did not show up at the cemetery without a scheduled burial. David did not arrive at 3:53 in the morning. David would not have walked from the chapel side of the cemetery, because the only road to the cemetery led to the cottage side. Yet the only way to approach the cottage from the chapel side was to walk through the cemetery itself, which was something no one would do at night for any reason that made sense. I made a decision. I want to be clear that the decision was not the decision the binder would have wanted me to make. The decision was a compromise. The decision was that I would not open the door, but that I would look out the kitchen window, which was on the side of the cottage opposite the door, to see if there was a vehicle in the gravel turnaround. If David's vehicle was there, I would have at least one piece of evidence that the person at the door was a real person. If no vehicle was there, I would have evidence that the person was not. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen window. I parted the curtain by maybe 2 inches. I looked out. There was no vehicle in the turnaround. But there was a man standing in the turnaround, about 30 feet from the cottage, looking at the kitchen window. The man was looking directly at the gap in the curtain where I was looking out. The man was David Carrick. He was wearing the dark suit he always wore to burials. His arms were at his sides. He was smiling at me. The knocking on the door on the other side of the cottage continued. The voice said, "Marcus, open the door, please." There were 2 of them. I let the curtain fall. I stepped back from the window. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and I held the binder in my lap, and I tried to keep my breathing steady. The knocking continued at the front door. The man in the turnaround did not move. I could not see him with the curtain closed, but I knew he was still there because I could hear, in the gravel, the small sounds a person makes when they shift their weight while standing still, and the sounds were coming from the same spot where I had seen him. I want to be precise about what I was processing. The binder said visitors could not enter the cottage if the doors and windows were closed and locked. The doors and windows were closed and locked. I had checked them every night for 11 months as part of a routine I had developed in my second week, and it's a routine that involved walking the perimeter of the cottage at 10 p.m. and verifying that every latch was engaged. I had done this at 10 p.m. on August 13th, the night of the bell. The cottage was sealed. The visitors could not enter. The visitors were, according to the binder, limited to the area outside the cottage and to making sounds and being seen. They could not act beyond those limits. I had been told the rule. I had not, until that moment, understood that the rule was the only thing protecting me. I sat on the kitchen floor, and I understood that the binder was not a document of eccentric institutional history. The binder was a survival manual. The binder had been written by people who had learned, through trial and consequence, what could happen if the items were not followed. The rule about the bell was not paranoia. The rule about the visitors was not folklore. The rules were the accumulated knowledge of 9 decades of caretakers who had been in the position I was in now, and who had, in some cases, not survived their own first encounters. The knocking stopped at 4:07 a.m. by my watch. The voice on the other side of the door said, one final time, "Marcus, please, I'm leaving. If you change your mind, I'll be at the chapel until sunrise. Come find me." Then the footsteps retreated, back across the gravel, in the direction of the chapel. I did not move from the kitchen floor for almost an hour. I listened. The man in the turnaround did not leave for a long time. I could hear him there. The small shifts in the gravel, the occasional sound of breathing. At 4:53 a.m., by my watch, the breathing stopped, and in the gravel made one final sound, the sound of weight lifting and footsteps moving away. And then the turnaround was silent, and the only sounds outside were the sounds of the pre-dawn woods returning to themselves, the first birds, the small rustlings of the maples. Sunrise was at 5:43. I waited until 6. Then I stood up. I went to the front door. I unlocked it. I opened it slowly. The gravel path to the door was empty. I stepped outside. The morning was cool and the air smelled like wet leaves. I walked the perimeter of the cottage. I saw nothing. I walked to the kitchen window. I looked at the turnaround. The gravel was disturbed in the spot where the man had been standing. I could see the impressions of his shoes. The impressions were the impressions of dress shoes, the kind of dress shoes a funeral director wears, yet with a smooth leather sole and a small heel. I went back inside. I locked the door. I called Thomas Aldred. He picked up on the 4th ring. He sounded like he had been awake. He said, "Marcus, tell me what happened." I told him. I told him about the bell at 3:41. I told him about the footsteps on the gravel at 3:53. I told him about the voice at the door using David Carrick's name and David Carrick's cadence. I told him about looking out the kitchen window and seeing David Carrick standing in the turnaround. I told him about the simultaneous presence of the voice at the door and the man at the window. I told him I had not opened the door. I told him I had stayed in the cottage until sunrise. I told him about the footprints in the gravel. Thomas was quiet for a long time. He said, "Marcus, I need to ask you a question. and I need you to think about it carefully before you answer. When was the last time you saw David Carrick in person? I thought about it. The most recent burial I had supervised had been in mid-July, about a month earlier. David had been there. He had been wearing the dark suit. We had spoken for maybe 5 minutes about the next burial that was scheduled for September. I told Thomas the date. He said, "And have you spoken to him since?" I told him I had spoken to David on the phone 4 times in the previous month, scheduling and rescheduling the September burial because the family had needed to delay it. He said, "When was the most recent phone call?" I checked my phone. The most recent call had been 6 days earlier. On August 8th, the call had been brief, about 2 minutes. And so David had told me the burial was now scheduled for September 12th, and that he would send me the paperwork by mail the following week. Thomas said, "Marcus, I need you to call David's office this morning. I need you to ask the receptionist if David is available. I need you to ask whether David has been at work in the past week. I need you to do this before you do anything else. Then I need you to call me back." I asked him why. He said, "Because the binder is wrong about one thing. And the thing it is wrong about is the assumption that visitors can only originate from the graves in the cemetery. The binder assumes the visitors come from people who are buried here. The binder is wrong. I learned this in my 14th year. I did not write it into the binder because I was not certain, and because writing uncertain things into the binder is dangerous, because the binder is treated as authoritative by the next caretaker, and writing speculation into it would make the speculation seem like established fact. But I am telling you now because you have had an encounter, and the encounter has used the face and voice of a living person, and the binder does not address that situation. Call David's office, then call me back." He hung up. I called David's office at 9 a.m. when I knew the receptionist would be in. I asked for David. The receptionist, a woman named Connie, who I had spoken with maybe a dozen times, said that David was unavailable. I asked when he would be back. She said she did not know. I asked if everything was all right. She paused. She said, "Bien, Marcus, I am not supposed to discuss this with anyone outside the family, but you worked with David on the recent services, and I think you should know. David was in a car accident last night, around midnight. He was driving back from a service in Stowe. He went off the road on Route 100. He's at the hospital in Burlington. He's alive, but he's in a coma. The family is with him. We don't know when he'll be back. We don't know if he'll be back." I sat in the cottage and I held the phone and I tried to understand what she was telling me. The accident had been at midnight, 3 hours and 41 minutes before the bell rang. The man at my door, the man in my turnaround, had not been a visitor from a grave. The man had been David Carrick himself, or some version of David Carrick, projected to the cemetery from the hospital bed in Burlington, where his actual body was lying in a coma. I asked Connie if she knew the details of the accident. She said she did not, only that David had been alone in the car and that the car had hit a tree on a curve. She said the family was being told he might come out of the coma in the next few days, or he might not. She said she would let me know if his condition changed. She asked me how I had heard about it. I told her I had not heard, that I had been calling about the September burial. She said she would handle the September burial herself if David was not available. She said she was sorry to deliver bad news. She said she would talk to me soon. She hung up. I called Thomas back. I told him what Connie had said. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Marcus, the visitors do not always come from the graves. Sometimes they come from people who are in transition, people who are dying, or who are between consciousness and unconsciousness, or who are in some state where the boundary between them and what is on the other side has become thin. I have seen this twice in 23 years. The first time was in 1997. A woman from town who I had known for years was dying of cancer. She came to the cemetery at night in the form I had known her in years before, when she was healthy. She knocked on the cottage door. She used my name. She tried to get me to open the door. I did not open it. She left at sunrise. She died in the hospital that morning, at the same time the visitor left the cemetery. The second time was in 2014. A young man from a neighboring town, the son of one of the trustees, and had been in a motorcycle accident and was on life support. He came to the cemetery on 3 consecutive nights. He used my name. He tried to get me to open the door. He did not get in. On the 4th night, his family took him off life support. He did not come back. I asked Thomas what the visitors wanted. He said, "I do not know. I have a theory. The theory is that they want to enter the cottage. The cottage is on the property of the cemetery. The cemetery is, in a way I do not understand, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is permeable. The cottage is the only structure on the property where the boundary is enforced, by the rules in the binder, by the locks on the doors and windows, by the procedures we follow. If a visitor enters the cottage, I think the boundary breaks, and I think the visitor takes the place of the caretaker. I think the caretaker becomes whatever the visitor was. I am speculating. I do not have evidence. The 2 cases I described did not result in a breach. I only have the cases where the rules held. I do not know what happens when the rules do not hold, because the caretakers who let visitors in are not around to tell us. I asked him what I should do now. He said, "You have done the right thing. You stayed in the cottage. You did not engage. The visitor left at sunrise. Whether David lives or dies in the next few days will determine whether the visitor returns. If David recovers, the visitor will not return. If David dies, the visitor may return on the night of his death to make one final attempt. Be prepared. Stay in the cottage. Do not open the door. Do not look at the windows after dark. Do not call David's family. Do not try to visit him at the hospital. Your role is to be in the cottage. Your role is to follow the binder." I asked him about the other item, item 14, the one about consulting the original record book when I saw a visitor I recognized. He said, "That item applies to visitors from the graves. The original record book contains the names of the people buried here, and the names tell you which grave the visitor came from, which is information we have used over the decades to track patterns. The item does not apply to visitors from people who are still alive. There is no record book entry for David Carrick because David Carrick is not buried in this cemetery. Do not consult the book. There is nothing in it that will help you." He paused. He said, "Marcus, yes, there is something else you need to know. The binder has a section I did not show you on your first day. The section is in the other category, items 30 through 36. I marked those items with a small piece of red tape on the page. The tape is so you can find them quickly if you need to. I did not draw your attention to them in the walkthrough because I did not want to scare you off the job in your first hour. The items describe what happens if a visitor succeeds in entering the cottage. The items describe the procedures the caretaker is supposed to follow if that happens. The procedures are not pleasant. The procedures involve abandoning the cottage and the cemetery and traveling to a specific location in northern Maine, where the trustees of a related institution will receive you. The procedures are the procedures of a person who has failed at the job. I want you to read those items today. I want you to know what is in them. I am sorry I did not show you sooner. I should have. He hung up. I went to the binder. I opened it to the other category. I flipped through the pages until I found the small piece of red tape, which was on the page that contained items 30 through 36, just as Thomas had said. I read the items. I am not going to give you the items in full. I am going to summarize them, because the items are detailed instructions for how to abandon the cottage and the cemetery in a way that prevents whatever is in the cottage from following you. And I have decided, in the months since, that publishing those instructions in detail would be irresponsible, say because the instructions are the kind of thing that could be useful to a person who genuinely needed them and could be misused by a person who did not. The items, in summary, said, if a visitor succeeds in entering the cottage, the caretaker is to leave the cottage immediately, taking only the binder and the keys, and is to drive directly to a specific address in a town near the Canadian border in northern Maine, where the caretaker will be received by people who are described only as the relations. The caretaker is not to return to the cemetery. The caretaker is not to contact the trustees. The caretaker is not to contact family or friends. The caretaker is to live at the address in Maine for a minimum of 1 year, during which time the situation at the cemetery will be handled by other people. After 1 year, the caretaker may return to ordinary life, but should not return to the cemetery, ever, under any circumstances. I read the items twice. I noted the address in Maine, which was a P.O. box in a town I had never heard of, with directions to a physical residence that involved driving past the post office and turning left at a barn with a blue roof. The directions were the kind of directions a person gives when the location is hard to find, and the writer wants to make sure the reader does not get lost. I closed the binder. I sat at the kitchen table. I tried to think about what I was going to do. The September burial was 28 days away. The bell had rung once. The visitor had come once. The visitor would, according to Thomas, return only if David died. David was in a coma. David might recover. David might not. I had a choice to make. And I could leave the cemetery now, before David's situation resolved, and give up the job. I could do this preemptively, on the grounds that the situation had become more than I had signed up for, and I could accept that I would lose the income and the housing and would be back in the position I had been in 11 months earlier, looking for work and unable to find it. Or I could stay, follow the binder, hope David recovered, and continue with the job after the situation passed. The first option was safer. The second option was the responsible option, in the sense that the trustees had hired me and depended on me and would have difficulty replacing me on short notice. The second option was also what Thomas had done in 1997 and in 2014, and what Thomas had survived. I decided to stay. I want to be honest about why. I decided to stay because I needed the job. I had not finished paying down my debts. I had not rebuilt my savings. I had no other prospects. The cemetery was the most stable thing in my life. I was not willing, after 11 months of recovering my financial footing, to throw it away over an event that might resolve itself within a few days. I called Thomas back. I told him my decision. He did not try to talk me out of it. He said, "Then follow the binder. Call me if anything changes. Check in with me every morning until David's situation resolves. Do not skip a day." I called him every morning for the next 3 days. David did not improve. David did not get worse. David remained in the coma. The family was, according to Connie, beginning to discuss what they would do if his condition did not change. if the doctors had given them a window of 7 to 10 days to make a decision about life support. The window was, by the third day, narrowing. Nothing happened at the cemetery during those 3 days. The bell did not ring. No visitors came. The nights were normal. I slept poorly. I followed my routine. I checked the latches at 10 p.m. I kept the radio on the marked frequency. I did not approach the chapel. I did not look out the windows after dark. On the morning of August 18th, 4 days after the bell had rung, Connie called me. She said David had died at 3:51 that morning. She said the family had taken him off life support the previous evening. She said the funeral was scheduled for August 22nd. She asked if I would attend. I told her I would not be able to, that the cemetery required my presence. She said she understood, and she said she would call me with details about the September burial, which would be handled by a different funeral director from a different town. She said she was sorry. She hung up. I called Thomas. I told him David had died. I told him the time of death. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. He said, "He died at 3:51. The bell rang at 3:41 on the night of the visitor. The bell ringing was a warning, 10 minutes before the visitor arrived. The visitor's arrival was timed to David's transition. He was not yet dead when the visitor came on August 14th. He was in the coma. The visitor was a projection of him during the in-between state. The visitor will come again tonight, Marcus." 3:51 a.m. The visitor will come at the moment of his death anniversary, 10 hours after the actual death. Yeah, the visitor will be different this time. The visitor will be desperate. The visitor will know that this is the last attempt. You need to be ready. He told me what to do. He told me to spend the day preparing the cottage. He told me to verify every latch. He told me to put extra weight against the doors, to push the kitchen table against the front door and the bedroom dresser against the back door. He told me to draw all the curtains and to pin them shut with safety pins so that they could not be parted by the wind or by any other means. He told me to put the chapel key, which I still had not retrieved, somewhere I could access it quickly, but not to retrieve it from the brick until I knew I needed it. He told me to keep the binder open on the kitchen table to the other section with the red tape page visible, so that if the visitor entered the cottage, I would have the instructions in front of me and would not have to search for them. He told me, finally, that he would drive up to the cemetery in the morning. He said he would arrive at sunrise. He said if I did not answer the door when he arrived, he would assume the visitor had succeeded, and he would do what the binder required him to do, which was to handle the situation himself. He did not say what handling the situation would involve. I asked him. He said, "Marcus, I am not going to tell you what I would do. I am going to tell you that I would do it. The cemetery has procedures for everything. The procedures for a successful breach are old. They have been used 3 times since 1936. They were used in 1958, in 1971, and in 1989. I have read about all 3. I know what to do. I am hoping I do not have to do it. I am driving up tonight. I will be at the cemetery at 5 a.m. before sunrise. I will park at the end of the dirt road, and I will walk in. I will not approach the cottage until sunrise. If you are alive at sunrise, I will help you handle whatever needs to be handled. If you are not, I will handle it without you. I am sorry to be telling you this. I am telling you so that you understand the gravity of the situation. I want you to survive tonight. I want you to follow the binder. I want you to be alive when I arrive." He hung up. I spent the day preparing the cottage. I did everything Thomas had told me to do. I pushed the kitchen table against the front door. I pushed the bedroom dresser against the back door. I drew the curtains and pinned them shut. I put the binder on the kitchen counter. As you opened to the red tape page, I checked every latch. I did the latches twice. I did them a third time. At 7 p.m. I made dinner. I ate it without tasting it. At 8 p.m. I sat in the kitchen with the binder. At 9 p.m. the sun went down. At 10 p.m. I did my routine perimeter check, which involved walking around the inside of the cottage and verifying every latch one more time. The latches were all engaged. At 11 p.m. I sat at the kitchen table and I waited. At 3:30 a.m., the bell on the chapel began to ring. The bell rang differently this time. The first ring was loud, the way a bell rings when struck hard, and the interval between the first and second rings was about 2 seconds, not the 4-second interval I had heard on August 14th. The bell continued at this faster pace for about 30 seconds, and then it shifted into the continuous ringing I had heard before, the kind that has no interval between strikes. The continuous ringing lasted for almost 6 minutes by my watch. When it stopped, the silence in the cottage was complete. I sat at the kitchen table. I did not move. I watched the binder open in front of me. I tried to keep my breathing steady. At 3:41 a.m., I heard the footsteps on the gravel. The footsteps were different this time, too. They were faster. They were the footsteps of a person walking with purpose, the way you walk when you are late for something. They came from the direction of the chapel, across the gravel path, and they did not stop at the front door. They walked around the cottage. I tracked them by sound. They walked along the south wall of the cottage, past the kitchen window, around the back, along the north wall, and back to the front. They stopped at the front door. There was a pause of about 10 seconds. Then the knock came. The knock was not 3 evenly spaced knocks this time. The knock was a single hard knock, followed by silence, followed by another single hard knock. The 2 knocks sounded like a person testing whether anyone was inside. The voice that came through the door was David's voice. The voice said, "Marcus, I know you're in there. I saw you through the window." I had not been at the kitchen window. It said the kitchen window was the window the visitor had used to see me on August 14th. The kitchen window was now pinned shut, with the curtain drawn. There was no way for the voice to have seen me through any window in the cottage, because every window was covered, and I had been sitting at the kitchen table, which was visible only from the front door if the door was open, which it was not. The voice was lying. The voice knew I was inside, but the voice did not know where I was inside, and the voice was guessing, and the voice was hoping I would respond to the lie by adjusting my position, which would tell the voice where I actually was. I did not move. I did not respond. I sat at the table, and I held still, and I thought about what Thomas had said about how the visitor would be desperate this time. The voice said, "Marcus, I died 10 hours ago, and I need you to let me in. I need somewhere to be. The cemetery is not enough. I need to be inside. Please, I am asking you as a friend." The voice was not asking me as a friend. David and I had not been friends. David had been a colleague, the assistant funeral director from the next town over, a man I had spoken with maybe 20 times in the past 11 months. All of those conversations professional and short. The voice was using the word friend because the word friend was a word that creates obligation, and the voice was testing whether the obligation would override the procedure. The voice said, "Marcus, I have a daughter. Her name is Emma. She is 6. She does not know yet that I died. She is going to find out tomorrow. I want to see her one more time before she finds out. The only way I can do that is to take a body, I am not asking for yours. I am asking you to drive me to her. I will leave when she sees me. I will not stay. I just want to say goodbye. Please. She is 6 years old. I did not know if David had a daughter. I did not know anything about David's family. The voice could be lying or telling the truth. The voice might know that I was a person who had been a high school teacher and who would feel the weight of a child's loss more than other things. The voice might be choosing the lever most likely to move me. I did not know. I sat at the table and I did not move, and I held the binder open in front of me, and I read the items in the other section, items 30 through 36, the items Thomas had marked with red tape, the items about what to do if the visitor entered. The voice spoke for a long time. The voice tried different approaches. The voice begged, the voice threatened, the voice made promises, the voice said it would haunt me if I did not let it in. The voice said it would leave me alone forever if I did. The voice said my mother's name, which it could not have known because I had not given that information to anyone at the funeral home, because I had not given that information to anyone at the cemetery, because the only people in my life who knew my mother's name were people who had nothing to do with David Carrick. The voice used my mother's name in a way that suggested she was on the other side of the door with David, that they were together in some place I could not see, that letting him in would somehow let her in too. I did not respond. I did not move. I read the items in the binder. At 4:07 a.m., the voice stopped. The footsteps did not retreat. Yet the voice was silent. The footsteps stayed at the door. I could hear nothing, but I could feel that the visitor was still there. The cottage felt occupied in a way it does not normally feel. The air had the quality of a room with another person in it. At 4:11 a.m., the door rattled. The door rattled the way a door rattles when someone tests the handle. The handle turned. The deadbolt held. The handle turned the other way. The deadbolt held. The rattling stopped. There was a pause of about 30 seconds. Then the door rattled again, harder this time. The kind of rattle a door makes when someone pushes against it with their shoulder. The kitchen table I had pushed against the door scraped about an inch on the floor. The deadbolt held. I could see the door in the dim light from the kitchen, and the door was bowing slightly inward, at the wood flexing under pressure, but the deadbolt held, and the table held, and the door did not open. The pressure stopped. There was another pause. Then the rattling moved. The visitor was no longer at the front door. The footsteps walked around the cottage again, faster this time, and the rattling came at the back door, with the bedroom dresser against it. The dresser scraped. The deadbolt held. The rattling moved to the bedroom window. The pinned curtain pulled tight against the pins. The window did not open. The rattling moved to the kitchen window. Same result. The rattling moved to the bathroom window, which was a small window over the toilet that I had not pinned because it was too small for a person to fit through, and the bathroom window was forced open, the latch breaking with a sharp metal sound, and the curtain ripped from one of its rings, and a hand came through. The hand was a man's hand. The hand was wearing a wedding ring. The hand reached through the open window and felt around the inside of the bathroom, the way a person feels around a dark room when they cannot see, looking for a light switch or a handle. The hand was not attached to a body that I could see, because the angle of the window did not allow me to see the body from where I was sitting in the kitchen. The hand was just a hand, reaching in, searching. I stood up from the kitchen table. I walked slowly to the bathroom doorway. The hand was still searching. The hand was now reaching toward the bathroom door. which was open, which led to the hallway, which led to the kitchen and the bedroom and the front door. If the hand could find a way to open the bathroom door from the inside, which it could not, because the bathroom door was already open and the hand was not attempting to open anything. But if the hand could pull the rest of the body through the window, the body would be inside the cottage, and the procedures in items 30 through 36 would apply. I closed the bathroom door from the hallway side. I closed it slowly, without sound. The hand did not seem to notice. I locked the bathroom door from the hallway side, with the small thumb latch above the handle that I had never used in 11 months. The latch engaged. The bathroom door was now sealed from the rest of the cottage. The hand was now in a closed bathroom with no other doors and a single window that the rest of the body would have to fit through. I went back to the kitchen, and I sat at the table. I waited. The hand spent about 15 minutes, by my count, searching the bathroom. I could hear it occasionally, knocking against things, the small bottles on the counter, the toilet paper holder, the towel rack. The hand was patient. The hand was looking for a way out of the bathroom. The hand could not find one because the bathroom door was locked, and the only window was the one the hand had come in through. And a hand cannot reach back through a window to pull a body in after it. At 4:36 a.m., the hand stopped moving. It rested on the bathroom counter. I could see it through the small gap under the bathroom door, illuminated by the hallway light I had turned on. The hand was still. The hand stayed still for about a minute. Then the hand began to retract, slowly, back toward the window. The hand left the bathroom counter. The hand crossed the bathroom floor in a way I cannot describe, except to say that it did not float exactly, but it did not move the way a hand attached to a body moves. The hand reached the window. The hand pulled itself through the window, back to the outside. The footsteps outside resumed. They walked around the cottage one more time. They returned to the front door. The voice spoke once more. The voice said, "Marcus, I am going to remember this." Then the footsteps walked away, across the gravel, in the direction of the chapel. The footsteps faded. The cottage was silent. I sat at the kitchen table. I did not move for a long time. I watched the clock above the stove. The clock said 4:49 a.m. Sunrise was at 5:48. I had 59 minutes to wait. I waited. At 5:15 a.m., I heard a vehicle on the dirt road. I heard it stop. I heard a door open and close. I heard footsteps, different footsteps. The footsteps of an older man walking carefully on gravel. The footsteps came up the dirt road, past the cemetery wall, into the property, and stopped about 30 feet from the cottage. I heard a voice call out. The voice said, "Marcus, it's Thomas. I'm here. I'm not coming any closer until sunrise. I just wanted you to know I'm here." I did not respond. I had decided, at some point during the night, that I was not going to respond to any voice from outside the cottage until I had visual confirmation that the voice belonged to a real person, and that the visual confirmation could only happen in daylight. Thomas waited. I could hear him occasionally. The small sounds of a person standing in cold air, shifting weight, putting his hands in his pockets. He did not approach the cottage. He did not knock. He did not call out again. At 5:48 a.m., the sky began to lighten. At 5:53 a.m., the first direct sunlight hit the eastern wall of the cottage. At 6:02 a.m., I heard Thomas's footsteps approach the front door. He knocked. He said, "Marcus, it's 6 a.m. The sun is up. I'm at the door. If you can open it, please open it." I stood up from the kitchen table. My legs were stiff. I walked to the front door. I pulled the kitchen table back from the door, just enough to allow the door to open. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. Thomas was standing on the gravel path. He was wearing a wool coat and a knit cap. His face was tired. He looked at me. He said, "Are you alone?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Is the visitor still on the property?" I said I did not know. I told him about the bathroom window. I told him about the hand. I told him about closing the bathroom door and locking it. I told him about the hand retracting and the visitor leaving. He nodded slowly. He said, "Show me the bathroom." I walked him through the cottage. I unlocked the bathroom door. I opened it. He looked inside. The window was still open. The latch was broken. The curtain was torn from one of its rings. The small bottles on the counter were knocked over. The toilet paper holder was bent slightly. The bathroom looked the way a small room looks after someone has searched it in the dark. Thomas examined the window for a long time. He examined the latch. He examined the curtain. He examined the floor of the bathroom, looking for marks or impressions. He found none. He turned to me. He said, "Marcus, I want to commend you. You did what most caretakers would not have done. You closed the bathroom door instead of trying to confront the hand. You let the visitor work through its own limitations. You waited it out. Most people, in your position, would have either opened the front door because they were exhausted, or would have approached the bathroom to try to fight the hand and would have been pulled through the window. You did neither. You did the right thing. The cottage is intact. You are alive. I am proud of you." I did not feel proud. I felt empty. I had been awake for almost 24 hours, and I had spent the night listening to a thing that knew my mother's name try to talk me into letting it inside the building I lived in. I sat down on the bathroom floor. I put my head against the wall. I did not cry, but I might have. I do not remember. Thomas helped me up. He took me to the kitchen. He made coffee. He sat across from me at the table. He said, "I am going to tell you something now that I should have told you on your first day. I did not tell you because I did not want to scare you off the job. I am going to tell you now because you have earned the right to know." He drank his coffee. He set the cup down. He said, "The cemetery is not what the trustees think it is. The cemetery is not what you think it is. The cemetery is older than the headstones suggest. The graves on the property go back to 1847, according to the original record book in the chapel. But the property itself was used as a burial ground long before 1847. The original use of the property was by a community that lived in this region in the 1700s, before the town existed. The community was small, maybe 40 people. The community had a relationship with something on this land. The relationship was, as far as I have been able to determine from the records, a kind of arrangement. The community buried its dead on the property, and in exchange, the community was protected from certain kinds of harm by something that lived on the property. I do not know what the something was. I do not know whether it still exists in the form it had in the 1700s. I do know that when the community was dispersed in the 1830s, by a combination of disease and migration, the arrangement was not formally ended. The arrangement was simply abandoned. The thing on the property remained. The thing was not consulted. Yet the thing was, in some sense, betrayed. He paused. He drank his coffee. He said, When the cemetery was founded in 1847 by the first generation of the town's settlers, the new burials began. The new burials were unrelated to the original community. The new burials were of people from the town. The thing on the property, whatever it is, did not distinguish between the original burials and the new burials. The thing began to interact with the new burials in the same way it had interacted with the original ones. The interactions produced visitors. The visitors were, at first, the people buried in the new graves. The visitors would appear at night and would attempt to approach the structures on the property. The original cemetery had a chapel, which was the only structure, and the visitors would attempt to enter the chapel. The chapel had a caretaker who lived in a small room at the back. The caretaker, in 1851, opened the door for a visitor. The caretaker disappeared. The visitor took the caretaker's place. The visitor lived as the caretaker for an unknown period of time, during which more burials occurred and more visitors appeared. The visitor that had been the caretaker was eventually identified as a visitor by the trustees of the time, who killed it with fire and rebuilt the chapel and the small room at the back. The new caretaker was given rules. The rules were the beginning of what is now the binder. He paused again. He looked at me. He said, "The 1936 reorganization changed the names on the headstones to confuse the visitors. The reorganization did not work the way the trustees had hoped. The visitors continued to appear. If the visitors used the names on the new headstones, the visitors were in some way drawing on the records of the cemetery, and the records were what the trustees had changed. The reorganization did make the visitors less frequent, because the visitors had to do more work to identify themselves to the caretaker, but the reorganization did not stop them. The reorganization is the reason the original record book is kept in the chapel. The original record book is the only document that links the names on the headstones to the names of the actual buried people. The original record book is the document the visitors want to read. The visitors cannot read it because the chapel is locked, and the visitors cannot enter locked structures on the property. The original record book is, in some way, the key to whatever the visitors want. And I do not know what they want. I have not been told. The trustees do not know. The binder does not say." He set down his coffee cup. He said, "Marcus, the reason I am telling you all of this is that what happened last night was different from what has happened before. The visitor that came last night was not from a grave on the property. The visitor was from a person who was dying off the property in a hospital in Burlington. This has happened before, twice in my time. But in both previous cases, the visitor was a person with a family connection to someone buried on the property. The woman who came in 1997 had a grandmother buried in Section 9. The young man who came in 2014 had a great-grandfather buried in Section 3. In both cases, the visitor was, in some sense, drawn to the property because of a family link. David Carrick has no family link to this property. I checked the records this morning before I drove up. There are no Carricks in the original record book. There are no Carricks in any of the headstones. David Carrick had no reason to come here. The fact that he came anyway suggests that something has changed. The thing on the property has, in some way, expanded its reach. The thing is now able to draw on people who have been on the property recently, who have done business here, who have any kind of connection to the cemetery's operations. David Carrick worked the recent burials. He was here in person 3 times in the past year. That, apparently, was enough. He paused. He looked at me. He said, "Marcus, I want you to understand what this means. Anyone who has been on the property is now potentially a future visitor. The trustees who visit twice a year are potential visitors. The funeral directors who handle burials are potential visitors. The family members who attended the burials are potential visitors. The expansion of the reach means the cemetery is going to be more active than it has been in its recent history. There are going to be more bell rings, there are going to be more visitors, there are going to be more nights like last night. I am telling you this because you need to know what you are signing up for if you continue in the position. The job is going to get worse. The procedures will still work. The binder will still protect you if you follow it. But the protection will be tested more often. You will be in the cottage more nights, with more visitors at the door, and the visitors will be people you know. And because they will be people who have been on the property recently, and the people who come to the cemetery are mostly people from the town, and the town is small enough that you will eventually know everyone. I asked him whether I should leave. He said, "I cannot tell you that. I made my own decision in 1997, after the first of the off-property visitors. I decided to stay. I stayed for 16 more years after that. I do not regret staying, but I am 68 years old, and I am tired, and I am glad to be retired. I made my decision because I did not have anywhere else to go, and because I had developed a sense of obligation to the property and to the town and to the binder. You have less invested. You have been here 11 months. You have a brother in California. You have a marriage you are still working on, possibly. That you have other options, even if those options are not visible to you right now. I would not blame you if you decided to leave. The trustees would replace you within a few months probably, although it would not be easy. Whoever replaced you would inherit the binder and the cottage and the situation. The job would continue. The cemetery would continue. The thing would continue. Your individual decision does not determine the future of the property. It only determines your own future." He stood up. He put on his coat. He said, "I am going to drive back to my house now. I am going to sleep. I am going to call you tomorrow. You should sleep too. Eat something. Take a walk in the daylight. The visitors do not come during the day. The property is safe in daylight. Use the daylight. Decide what you are going to do. Call me when you have decided." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. He turned back. He said, "One more thing. The visitor last night said it was going to remember you. I do not know what that means. I have never had a visitor say that to me. I am telling you so that you know. I do not have advice on what to do about it. I will think about it. I will tell you if I come up with anything." He left. I heard his truck start. I heard him drive away. I sat at the kitchen table. I drank the rest of the coffee. I tried to think about what I was going to do. I did not sleep that day. I tried to. I lay down on the bed in the bedroom at noon, with the curtains open and the sun coming in, and I closed my eyes, and I lay there for 2 hours without sleeping. My mind kept returning to the hand in the bathroom. The hand had been wearing a wedding ring. I had not, until lying on the bed and trying to sleep, thought about the wedding ring. David Carrick wore a wedding ring. I had noticed it during the burials, the way you notice small details about people you work with. The ring on the hand had been the same ring, gold, slightly worn, with a small line of darker metal where the polish had worn through. The hand had been David's hand, in every detail I had been able to see. The hand had not been a generic representation of a hand, at the way a visitor might appear if it were drawing on a general impression of a person. The hand had been specific. The hand had been observed. I got up at 2 p.m. I walked to the kitchen. I made a sandwich. I ate it standing at the counter. I called Thomas. I told him about the wedding ring. I told him the hand had been specific in a way that suggested the visitor had detailed knowledge of David, not just a general impression. I told him I was concerned about what this meant. Thomas was silent for a long moment. He said, "Marcus, the visitors have always been specific. The visitor that came in 1997 looked exactly like the woman, down to a small scar she had on her cheek from a childhood fall. The visitor that came in 2014 looked exactly like the young man, down to the leather jacket he had been wearing at the time of the accident, which was in the hospital with him on a chair next to the bed. The visitors draw on the totality of the person. They are not impressions. They are reproductions. The wedding ring being correct is not unusual. The wedding ring being correct is, in fact, what we should expect. I am sorry I did not warn you about that. I had not thought to warn you because in my experience, the specificity of the visitors has always been part of the encounter. And I had assumed you understood that from the binder." I asked him whether the visitors could draw on knowledge that the original person had not had access to. He said, "What do you mean?" I told him about the voice using my mother's name. I told him my mother's name had not been given to anyone at the funeral home, not to anyone at the cemetery, not to David Carrick, not to anyone in the town. I told him my mother had died 15 years ago, and that I had not spoken her name aloud in my time at the cemetery, and that I was certain David had not known the name. Thomas was quiet for a longer time. He said, "Marcus, the visitor used your mother's name?" I said yes. He said, "I have never heard of a visitor using information that the original person did not have. The visitors have always been limited to what the original person knew. The woman in 1997 knew the names of my children because she had babysat them when they were young. The young man in 2014 knew the layout of the cottage because he had been inside for a Christmas dinner the trustees had hosted in 2011. The visitors used the information they should have had access to. They did not use information they should not have had access to. Yes, the visitor using your mother's name is new. The visitor using your mother's name is not in the binder. I do not know what it means. I am going to have to think about this." He paused. He said, "Marcus, I am going to ask you to do something. I am going to ask you to drive into town tonight before dark and to stay at the inn on Main Street. The inn is run by a woman named Helen Reeves, who has known me for 40 years. I will call her and tell her you are coming. You will stay there tonight. You will stay there tomorrow night. You will stay there until I have figured out what is happening. The cottage is safer than the inn during a normal visitor encounter because the cottage is sealed and the binder applies. The cottage may not be safer than the inn during whatever is happening now. The visitor said it would remember you. If the visitor used information it should not have had, the rules of the binder may not apply to whatever this is. I want you off the property until I understand." I asked him what he was going to do. He said, "I am going to drive to Maine. I am going to talk to the relations. The relations are the people I would have sent you to if the visitor had succeeded last night. The relations have been involved with this property for longer than the trustees have. The relations have records that the binder does not have. The relations know things I do not know. I am going to tell them what happened, and I am going to ask them what they know about visitors using information they should not have. I will be gone for 2 days. I will call you when I know more. Do not stay at the cottage tonight. Promise me." I promised him. I packed a bag, and I packed clothes for 3 days, my laptop, my phone charger, the binder, and the chapel key, which I retrieved from behind the loose brick in the fireplace because Thomas had not told me what to do with it, and I did not want to leave it on the property if the property was going to be unattended. I put the chapel key in my pocket. I locked the cottage. I drove into town. I checked into the inn. Helen Reeves was a thin woman in her 70s who took my information without asking questions and gave me a room on the second floor at the back of the building. She told me Thomas had called and that everything had been arranged. She told me the room rate had been waived. She told me she would bring up dinner at 6. She did not ask why I was staying at her inn instead of at the cottage 3 miles away. I sat in the room. I read the binder, and I went through the other section item by item, looking for any item that addressed visitors using unauthorized information. There was no such item. The binder assumed visitors were limited to the knowledge of the original person. The binder did not contemplate the situation I was now in. Thomas called me the following evening, on August 20th, at 7 p.m. He had reached the relations in Maine. He had spent 8 hours with them. He told me what he had learned. He said, Marcus, the relations have a different version of the records. The relations have records going back to the early 1700s. The relations have been keeping records since before the cemetery existed, since the original community was on the property. The relations are the descendants of that community. They moved north when the community dispersed in the 1830s, and they have been in northern Maine ever since. They have continued to track what happens at the cemetery. They have a relationship with the trustees that the trustees do not fully understand. The trustees believe the relations are a charitable foundation that helps fund the upkeep of the cemetery. The relations are something else. The relations are the inheritors of the original arrangement. The relations have been managing the situation at the cemetery for almost 2 centuries. The binder is the relations' work. The binder has been updated by the relations through each caretaker, although the caretakers have never been told this. The caretakers have believed they were updating the binder themselves with the help of the previous caretaker. The caretakers have, in fact, been recording observations that the relations have then incorporated into the binder. The relations are the institutional memory. The trustees are the legal owners. The caretakers are the people in the cottage. The 3 groups have not historically been in communication with each other beyond what is necessary. He paused. He said, "The relations told me what the visitor using your mother's name means." The information the visitor used was not information drawn from David Carrick. The information was drawn from you. The thing on the property has, in some way, gained access to you directly. This has happened before. The relations have records of 3 previous instances in 1819, 1903, and 1968. In all 3 instances, the caretaker had a particular kind of vulnerability that the thing was able to exploit. The vulnerability was not a personal weakness. The vulnerability was a circumstance. The caretaker had been on the property for a specific length of time, between 10 and 12 months, and had developed a routine that involved a specific kind of repetition. The repetition created a kind of pattern that the thing could read. The thing learned the caretaker through the patterns. Once the thing had learned the caretaker, the thing could draw on the caretaker's knowledge directly, including knowledge that the original person of any given visitor would not have had. Once this happened, the thing's reach expanded permanently. The caretaker became, in some way, a source of information for the thing for the rest of the caretaker's life, regardless of whether the caretaker remained on the property. I did not say anything for a long time. Thomas waited. I said, "You are telling me the thing has access to me?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Permanently?" He said, "Yes, the relations confirm this. The thing does not lose access once it has gained access." The 3 previous caretakers in this situation continued to be sources of information for the thing for the rest of their lives. In all 3 cases, the caretakers left the cemetery soon after the discovery. The caretakers moved away. The caretakers tried to put distance between themselves and the property. The distance did not matter. The thing continued to draw from them. The thing used them to learn about other people the caretakers knew. The thing used the caretaker's relationships to expand its reach further. By the time the caretakers died, the thing had access to dozens of people through them, including family members, friends, colleagues, anyone the caretaker had thought about with sufficient frequency. I said, "What happened to the people the thing gained access to?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. He said, "The relations told me. The people did not all become visitors. The people did not all die strange deaths. Most of them lived ordinary lives and died ordinary deaths. The thing did not, in most cases, harm them directly. The thing used them to learn. The thing was, in some way, building a map. The map was a map of the people in the caretaker's life and the people in those people's lives, expanding outward. The map has continued to grow since 1968, when the third caretaker was compromised. The third caretaker died in 1991. The map did not stop growing when she died. The thing has continued to use her connections, and in the connections of the connections, to learn about more and more people. The relations have been tracking the growth. The map now includes, by the relation's best estimate, several thousand people, most of whom have no connection to this cemetery, and most of whom do not know they are on the map. I said, "What does the map do?" He said, "The relations do not know. The relations have a theory. The theory is that the thing is preparing for something. The theory is that the thing has been preparing for a long time, and that the preparation involves understanding as much as it can about the human population in the region. The theory is that, at some point, the thing will use the map for whatever it has been preparing for. The relations do not know when. The relations do not know what. The relations know only that the map is growing, and that each compromised caretaker has accelerated the growth, and that you are now one of the compromised caretakers. The relations are sorry. The relations have asked me to tell you that they are sorry. The relations have been trying to prevent this for 2 centuries, and the relations have failed 3 times before, and the relations have failed again with you. The relations want me to tell you that you did nothing wrong. The relations want me to tell you that the previous 3 caretakers also did nothing wrong. The relations want me to tell you that the thing has, over time, learned how to compromise caretakers, and that the methods are now subtle enough that the binder cannot prevent them. The binder addresses the symptoms. The binder does not address the cause. I sat in the in-room. I held the phone. I looked at the wall. And so I said, what am I supposed to do? Thomas said, though, the relations have a recommendation. The recommendation is that you leave the cemetery, leave the region, leave the country, if possible. The recommendation is that you go somewhere you have never been, with no family connections, no friends, no professional history. The recommendation is that you change your name, your appearance, your routines. The recommendation is that you live a life with as little continuity as possible to the life you have been living. The recommendation is not that this will sever the thing's access to you. The recommendation is that this will limit the usefulness of the access. The thing has access to you, but the access is most useful when you have a network of relationships that the thing can use to expand. If you have no network, the thing has nothing to expand into. The access becomes a dead end. The relations told me that the previous 3 caretakers were not given this advice in time. The previous 3 caretakers continued their lives normally, and the thing used them. The relations are giving you the advice they wish they had given the others. I said, "Does the recommendation work?" He said, "The relations do not know. The recommendation has not been tested. The relations have only the negative cases. the 3 previous caretakers who did not follow the recommendation because the recommendation did not exist. The relations are hopeful that the recommendation will limit the damage. The relations cannot guarantee it. I said, "What about my brother, my family, the people already in my life?" Thomas said, "The thing has, by the relations assessment, it already accessed them. Anyone you have thought about with sufficient frequency in the past 11 months is already on the map. Your brother in California, your wife, even though you are separated, your parents, even though they are deceased, your friends, your former students, anyone you have been in mental contact with. The thing already has them. Leaving will not protect them from being on the map. Leaving will only prevent the addition of new people to the map through you. The people already on the map are on the map. The relations are sorry. The relations have no advice for protecting the people who have already been added. The relations have only the recommendation for limiting future additions." I sat in the in-room for a long time after Thomas hung up. I want to tell you what I did. I want to tell you that I followed the recommendation, that I left the country, that I changed my name and my appearance and my routines, that I am now living a life of minimal continuity in a place I had never been before this happened. I did not do that. I drove back to the cottage on the morning of August 21st. I packed up my belongings. I left the cottage and the binder and the chapel key on the kitchen table. I drove to the trustee's office in town, and I told the 3 elderly women that I was resigning, effective immediately. I told them I was sorry for the short notice. I told them my brother in California was sick and needed me. The lie was easy to tell. The trustees were sad to lose me. They wished me well. They asked if I could stay until they found a replacement. I told them I could not. They accepted this. Yet they thanked me for my service. They said they would call Thomas to ask him to handle the property until a new caretaker was hired. I drove to my brother's house in California. The drive took 5 days. I told my brother what had happened, in a version that left out the supernatural elements and included only the parts about the bell and the visitor and the funeral director's death. My brother was sympathetic. He told me I could stay with him as long as I needed. He told me he was glad I had left. I have been at my brother's house for almost 3 months. I have not gone back to the cemetery. I have not contacted the trustees. I have not contacted Thomas, although he has called me twice, and I have let the calls go to voicemail, and I have not called him back. I have applied for teaching jobs in the area, and I have, last week, been offered a position at a private school in a town near my brother's house. I am going to take the position. I am going to start in January. I am going to try to live the life I would have lived if I had never gone to Vermont. I know that the recommendation from the relations was the correct recommendation. I know that I should have changed my name and my appearance. I know that I should have severed my connections. I know that by going to my brother and by applying for a teaching job and by trying to live a normal life, I am providing the thing on the cemetery property with new connections to add to the map. I know that my brother is now more on the map than he was before because I have been thinking about him every day. I know that the children I will be teaching in January will become entries on the map through me, as simply by being in my classroom and in my thoughts. I know all of this. I have decided to live with it. I have decided that the alternative, the life of minimal continuity in a place I have never been, is not a life I am willing to live. I have decided that the thing on the cemetery property has been, by Thomas's account, building its map for 2 centuries, and that the map has grown by thousands of people through the previous compromised caretakers, and that my contribution to the map will be marginal compared to what is already there. I have decided that the relations recommendation, while correct from their perspective, is not actionable for me because I am 36 years old and I have a brother and a wife I am trying to reconcile with and a future I would like to have. And I am not going to give those things up to slow the growth of a map that is already, by all accounts, vast. I want to tell you what made me make this decision. I want to tell you it was a brave decision, or a wise decision, or a decision based on careful weighing of the costs and benefits. It was none of those things. The decision was made for me on the third night I spent at my brother's house. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom. I woke up at 3:41 in the morning. I do not normally wake up at 3:41 in the morning. I had not woken up at 3:41 in the morning since the night the bell rang at the cemetery. I lay in the bed in my brother's guest bedroom, and I tried to figure out what had woken me. The house was quiet. My brother was asleep down the hall. The street outside was quiet. Yet there was no sound that should have woken me. Then I heard it. I heard faintly, from somewhere in the distance, the sound of a bell. It was not a loud bell. It was not a close bell. It was the sound of a bell ringing at the edge of audibility, the way a far church bell sounds when the wind is right. The bell rang for about 30 seconds. Then it stopped. The bell was not a real bell. There were no churches near my brother's house with bells that rang at 3:41 in the morning. The bell was the bell from the chapel at Hollybrook, 3,000 miles away, ringing at a frequency that should not have been audible from where I was. The bell was the thing telling me that distance did not matter. The bell was the thing telling me that the access it had to me was not affected by where I was. I lay in the bed and I understood, and in a way I had not understood when Thomas had told me that the relations recommendation would not have worked. The recommendation had been a recommendation made out of hope. The relations had been hopeful that distance and disconnection would limit the thing's access. The relations had been wrong. The thing's access was complete. The thing could find me wherever I went. The thing had already added my brother to the map. The thing had been waiting for me to settle into my new life so that the map could continue to grow. The bell rang again the following night at 3:41. It has rung every night since. It has been ringing for almost 3 months. I have learned to sleep through it. I have learned not to react. I have not told my brother. I have not told anyone. I am telling you now because I have, in the past week, had started hearing something else. The bell rings at 3:41. After the bell, sometimes I hear footsteps. The footsteps are on the gravel of the cemetery, 3,000 miles away. The footsteps are unhurried. The footsteps walk from the chapel to the cottage. The footsteps stop at the cottage door. The footsteps pause for a long moment. Then the voice speaks. The voice is David Carrick's voice. The voice says, "Marcus, the new caretaker is in the cottage. He is asleep. The new caretaker does not know what I am. The new caretaker has not read the binder yet. The trustees did not give it to him. They gave it to Thomas to update before they passed it on, and Thomas has not finished. The new caretaker is in the cottage with no rules and no warnings and no knowledge of what is going to happen. The new caretaker is going to open the door for me, Marcus. The new caretaker is going to open the door tonight or tomorrow or the night after. I am going to be in the cottage. I am going to be the caretaker. I am going to be in the position you were in. The thing on the property is going to have a new source of access. The thing on the property is going to add the new caretaker's connections to the map. The map is going to grow. You are responsible for this, Marcus. You left the cottage. You left the binder. You left the chapel key. You left without making sure the trustees handed off properly. You did not call Thomas. You did not check on the property. You are responsible. I am going to remember this, Marcus. The thing on the property is going to remember this through me. The map is going to remember that the voice spoke last night for the longest it has spoken yet. The voice spoke for almost 20 minutes. The voice told me details about the new caretaker, his name, his age, his family situation. The voice told me he had 2 young children who had visited the cottage with him on his first day. The voice told me the children were now on the map. The voice told me the children's names. The voice told me what schools the children attended. The voice told me the address of the children's mother, who had not moved to the cemetery with the new caretaker because she was a nurse with a job in a city 2 hours away, and she could not relocate. The voice told me, at the end, that the bell rings every night now at the cemetery, not just on the rare nights it used to ring. And the voice told me the new caretaker has been hearing the bell every night for 2 weeks and has been calling Thomas about it, and Thomas has been telling him to ignore it because the bell is malfunctioning. The voice told me Thomas does not know that the bell is ringing every night because Thomas is no longer the person being consulted about the property. The voice told me that the trustees have hired a new advisor for the property, a man named Harold, who is from a different town and who does not have access to the binder and who has been giving the new caretaker bad advice. The voice told me Harold is not a real person. Harold is a construction. Harold is the thing wearing a face it built to manage the new caretaker. The voice stopped at 4:01 a.m. The footsteps walked back across the gravel. The cemetery returned to silence. The bell did not ring again that night. I am recording this on November 18th. It is 2:13 in the morning at my brother's house. My brother is asleep. The teaching job starts in January. I have not figured out what to do. Comment where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. I am asking because I want to know how many of you are awake at 3:41 in the morning, your time, because if any of you are and any of you live near the cemetery in northeastern Vermont I have not named, you may be hearing the bell too. The bell may have already added you. The map may already include you. The thing may already be reaching toward your connections and your family and the people you love through whatever brief contact you have had with this story. I am sorry if it has. I did not mean to put you on the map. I was warned, and I did not act on the warning in the way I should have, and the consequences of my decision are not limited to me. Thomas has called me 3 more times since I started recording these. I have not answered. I will not answer. I do not want to know what is happening at the cemetery. I do not want to know what the new caretaker is doing. I do not want to know what the children look like or what their names are, except that I already know the names because the voice told me. I am trying to forget the names. I am not succeeding. The voice will speak again tonight. The voice will tell me more details. The voice will tell me, eventually, what it wants me to do, because the voice has been building toward something. I do not know what the voice wants. I do not know if I will refuse. I do not know if I will be able to refuse. Yeah, the thing has had access to me for 3 months, and the access has not weakened. If you ever take a job as a caretaker at a private cemetery in a remote part of New England, and the previous caretaker hands you a binder, do not assume the binder is the work of an eccentric old man. Read the binder. Follow it. Do not improvise. Do not stay in the position past your 10th month. Do not develop routines that involve repetition. Do not let the property learn you. Leave before you are compromised. The binder will not tell you when you are about to be compromised, because the binder does not know. The binder addresses the symptoms. The binder does not address the cause. Leave at month 9. Find another job. Tell the trustees you are sorry. Do not look back. I did not leave at month 9. I left at month 11. And I was already on the map by then. I am still on the map. I will be on the map for the rest of my life. The bell will ring at 3:41 every night for the rest of my life. The voice will speak. The map will grow. I am sorry.